Okay. So I don't know if you guys have noticed in open hours, but I have these weird internet issues every now and again. So of course they like to flare up during open hour because that's just how life works. So I don't know what's going on right now, but we might not have the slides. We'll see. Maybe I'll shoot them over to somebody. Anyway, but I'm pretty excited because we have some pretty sweet news. But give me one more minute. I'll see if I can get these slides up and then we'll get started. And Wayne, did you say that you're running on Linux and that's why the green screen's weird?
Yeah.
That reminds me, I was talking to our swag supplier the other day because looks like, I'll give you some preliminary news. Looks like we're going to be getting our Salt Project branded things in the Salt store. So we're excited about that. And I was talking to him about what to put in the store. And he was offering all these suggestions. And I said, you don't understand. We have tech people. You can't just put crappy Bluetooth headphones. Like they have to be either really good tech or just stick with t-shirts and hats and good stuff. And he's like, oh, tech guys like Windows instead of Mac. And I was like, no, like Linux. And he's like, I don't even know what that is. I was like, okay. He's like, never mind. Okay, different level.
Wow. Yeah, that's that's good.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Right.
Is that when you said, let me draw you a Venn diagram? You're not in this circle?
That's right. That's funny. Okay, well, let's give this a try and see how well it works. All right, we'll see how well my internet likes to hang in there. I did finally call them yesterday, and I think I have a solution, but it won't be implemented until tomorrow. So we'll see. Keep you posted next week. My internet's better. So we'll go ahead and get started, though. Welcome, everyone, to Salt Project Community Open Hour. I'm your host and community manager, Janae Andrus, and we are over a week into April. I don't know how that happened, but somehow we're in April. So we have a few things to overstate. This is definitely going to be a quality over quantity day because we don't have a lot, but what we have is pretty exciting. So we've got, of course, our general update, a little bit of process improvement, and then the news, and we'll do some Q&A and talk about steps if you want to. So keep it pretty easy today. All right. So we have our next virtual meetup coming up. The one we had planned fell through. So I have actually another one queued up that we're going to wait on that I'm actually really excited about. So I have to confirm a couple things, but I'll be reaching out to a few people, might be some of you, and so we can let you know what we're doing for our meetup. It's going to be pretty cool, I think, if it works out. So I really hope we can pull this off for this month because I think it'll be really fun and timely, actually. So, but that will be third Wednesday as usual at 4 o'clock Mountain Time. So Wednesday, April 21st this month. So third Wednesday of every month is when we try to do those virtual meetups, which is a really fun time to get the community together on a specific topic and really dive a little bit deeper as a community. So those are a lot of fun. Just so you guys know, this afternoon, our doc clinic that is normally streaming is canceled. So if you tune in, you will be alone. I don't want you to experience that, so don't tune in. It's off the calendar, so that won't be going on this afternoon. All right, and then of course this week, Chunga has pretty much recovered from COVID, so that's good news, which means we've got a new episode of The Hack that came out, and then the new Salt Air episode will be posted by the end of the day today, and I believe it's the one on salt states, so it should be a pretty good one. I tried to get Tom to sing the state song. I remember in the episode, he's like, let's talk about states. I just suddenly had the 50 state song stuck in my head. He didn't enjoy it, but we tried to be obnoxious. But he actually ends up doing a really cool demo in that Salt Air episode. So hope you guys be sure to catch it. Like I said, it'll be posted by the end of the day today. And yeah, be sure to check that one out. It's a good one. Tom's demo was really good on that one. Okay, two process improvement things. We talked about this last week, but I want to talk about it again. Working groups. So we're putting a lot more focus on working groups recently. I mean, we've always focused on them, but just especially right now, we really want the working group to be feeling invigorated and excited. And I think that goes best when there's a project to be had. So we still need captains for some of the groups. So be sure to reach out to me or to Sage, and we can make that happen. We did have our first Kubernetes meeting this week, so that was cool. And I believe they want to do a survey, and I don't know if that was posted or not. So I didn't see it, but I don't know if anyone here knows, but that may be coming around if it hasn't already. So does anyone have any thoughts about working groups, ways that maybe you think we could improve them, things you think are going right, things, what are your thoughts around working groups? Which ones have you enjoyed? Which ones do you see dying? Which ones are you excited to ramp up? Which ones do you see a good project for? Which one are you really excited about? We have several new ones. Any thoughts on working groups? I feel like you're all just being quiet because you want me to just get to the news. I wish it's fine. I shouldn't have buried it. But actually, I'm glad I did because
I'll mention a quick comment about working groups. One of the things I think that could really help their participation is more, and we could definitely use some help from the community as well on this, is more advertising, more promotion, more just when the meetings are, kind of what they're talking about, just like help us get the word out about them. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Reddit, definitely share them. There's a salt subreddit, so like definitely help us promote it there. Like basically all the places that people are looking for that information, just help us get it out there, and I think that would help a lot. And also like specific to the working groups, if there's specific projects related to those topics that you want to see in SALT, to me that's where like the working groups that have been really successful are the ones that have a long-term or even like a short-term project of like a feature or a set of features that the group wants to get into SALT. So yeah, that's all I had to say about that.
No, that's really good. And that's a very good point about promoting the working group. I think that a couple things that will help that, again, I feel like we come back to this every week, but that calendar plugin that we keep talking about, it should not be so elusive, will really help because it will just be really clear when everything is in a really digestible way and a much more public way. Additionally, besides like the SALT subreddit, we also have all of our social channels, which we are going to be revamping because we have a team that will be starting to run our social, which we just haven't had the bandwidth for the last couple months. So we'll be able to, in the past, we haven't posted really much about working groups on our social, but we absolutely can. So, and I love the idea of, the community being more involved in sharing. Like if you have a working group coming up that you could maybe use some more involvement on, there's certain projects in your group, reach out to other contributors and get them involved and share in your channels. Absolutely. Definitely helps. Okay. Going to move on from here to our news. Gary, I hope you're listening. These 4 features have been released to open or are are cleared to be released. They're not released yet. Important clarification, but they have been cleared to be released to open. So we have our AIX Solaris minions, network minions, Windows agentless, and drumroll for Gary's Delta proxy. So those have been cleared to be released. And so we will come up with well, Sage isn't here to share, but there will be a plan for getting those released. So
That is
our day
super, super awesome.
right? The first thing that Sage and I said when we got this news was, Gary will be so happy.
I just wanted one
Great.
of them. You gave like you gave the whole store away.
I know. No, it's fun. So we're excited about this. We'll definitely keep you posted on how that comes up. So
You can expect they'd be in 3004.
Does that include, when you say network minions, does it include the Juniper native minion?
It will imply, oh, well, yes. That implies all of those native minions.
Awesome. That right there, I think by itself is huge for the community. I can speak from experience. I know there's some folks that are really, really upset that wasn't open.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. I think that will really help both adoption of open as well as salt stack config.
Yeah.
Because right now salt's pretty low on the totem pole for people doing network automation because of the requirement for running a proxy minion for each device. So I think that's absolutely awesome, and it'll be good for the community, and it'll be good for VMware.
Just to let you know, the Juniper and Arista native minion have been working in a Python 3 TMAT-based native minion. They've been validated by both Juniper and Arista, have been working for over a year. They're really solid. And when we get the details, we should be able to even pump it out for versions of Salt that are already in the field. And in Solaris news, we do have a Python 3 version of a TMAT-based native minion for both Solaris 10 on Intel and Spark and Solaris 11.4 Intel and Spark. That should be coming out.
I'm also curious about what Solarius is.
Oh man,
Sorry,
I can't
Solarius.
spell for nuts.
Oh, that wasn't
It's super
today?
hilarious.
It should have been actually spelt with a H, so it's hilarious.
there you go. So we're pretty excited about our big news. We'll definitely keep you in the loop, and we still have lots of time for Q&A, or if anyone wants to talk about a set that is open, one of our salt enhancement proposals. This is your time. So this is your time to connect and ask all your questions. We've got the team here to answer them for you. And also, while you're thinking of your questions, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be getting Salt Project branded things into our store, which means that the Salt Stack branded things are going away here very shortly. So the residual things that are still in the store, if you still want anything, now is the time. So store.saltstack.com, I believe, is still the URL. There's also a link on saltproject.io. So you can go to saltproject.io, which is, of course, our source of truth for all things Salt Project, saltproject.io. There's a link to the store there if you want any Salt Stack branded things before they're gone, and stickers and all of that.
So the legacy stuff is on sale?
Yeah, we actually several of the prices, not all of them, and I need to go through and mark a few more down. But there's like a Patagonia sweater that's 60% off, stuff like that. So we good. And we'll probably mark it down a little bit more here too, but I'll keep you posted. But yeah, last call if you want to stock up on those stickers. So they're going away.
Hello, folks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's time for questions, right?
Yes, it is, Carl.
Yeah. I just posted the link in the chat to the pull request. It's been kind of neglected for a few months, I think. And I mean, I just wanted to give a bit of a context. I mean, this pull request by itself probably wrong and probably should not be merged. But it is like, I would say, an example and some kind of a proof of an issue, which Salt has, and we actually encounter it in production like often. So we like really wonder if somebody can look at it.
Yeah, I have looked at it several times. I actually need to reproduce the issue, and I haven't had time to do that. So that's basically the holdup there. But I have looked at it, and I'm not sure until I reproduce the issue what the path forward is.
Mm. Yeah, we are unable to reproduce it on the small scale. Maybe you'll find a way. So it is reproducible for us starting from like 30 minions, and it's like a 50-50 chance on 100 minions, and the more, the worse, basically.
Yeah, I have the ability to get 30 minions going. It just takes time for me to do that. And I'm working on other things as well. So that's sort of where I'm at with that. It will happen. I can't say exactly when, but hopefully like within the next month, I'll have time. So hopefully we can, do something for the next major release, which will be 3004.
Yeah, thank you.
I do have to say that I love that comment. To do tests. This looks really familiar to me though, and I'm not sure. Oh well. Oh yeah. Okay.
It is familiar because we asked you to do a test cleaning for this.
I was scrolling down the issue
Yeah.
and I was like, oh yeah, look, I commented. I did go through this on the test clinic. Oh yeah. That I think I was either trying to port this one or a related one, and yeah, that function. I'm looking at this. I don't remember precisely, but I do see my comment here, and that I do remember that, yeah, this function initially was pretty just basic and kind of, oh yeah, it's this thing. And then it went from, oh, it's just like this thing to it's everything. And yeah, that has caused some issues. Yep.
I had a couple of things.
Yeah.
Although one may end up being just an observation now because it doesn't seem to be as much of a problem, or I'm having trouble reproducing it. We recently upgraded to 3002.6 for our master. This is running 40 minions behind it that are on a 10-minute high state schedule. It appeared we had a memory leak that was slow. I'm aware of the one that was resolved in 3002.2 that was pretty drastic. And I've been keeping an eye on the process. It's gone from 400 megs to about 1.9 gigs, and it seems to have stabilized there. Is that a reasonable amount of memory to be used for 40 minions? Is that to be expected? And I don't know what caused it to stabilize, because I did have an instance or a VM explode because it did use much more than that at one point.
Are you using any Git pillars or state trees?
I was using, and that's the other question I had. We were using both GitFS and an external Git pillar. We've turned this off, and I don't know that change coincided. It may be, you know what, and you may have hit the nail on the head. It may be that the upgrade happened before we turned that off, and the time frame in which it did blow up and use all the memory was when we had those turned on. We've since removed those.
Yeah, I know that there's definitely memory leaks in the Git stuff.
Okay, that would make complete sense for what I think I've seen as far as the timeline of changes, which leads me to my next question. And if that's what it is, that's okay. As far as I'm concerned, frankly, it's disappointing that the GitFS and the external Git pillar have been around for so long, and they're such a mess still. And I know some of that is the upstream libraries that
right
breaking changes.
The memory leaks are
those
in
things. Yeah, those things are a mess, which is not the Salt project's fault. It's those, you know, those upstream libraries. However, if that is the case, what I think we're lacking, or at least I'm lacking, and I would like some direction on, and maybe we can document this or give an example set of states to do this. The problem then becomes, okay, I have a great way to do a git clone and pull down things on with the command line git client, which, you know, then you could troubleshoot really well. You can make sure that if you're doing SSH off, that's not a problem, right? And you're separating testing just git stuff from what Salt is doing. So the problem though is that I have to make sure that I don't have things changing on those routes in the middle of my scheduled high states, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of anybody who's published an example of doing this, you know, building your own, you know, your own Git clone for routes. I do know that the entire PS team said that's the way to go. Don't use the GitFS and the external Git pillar. However, I never saw an example of doing that.
Part of it is just how it's constructed, right? It works the same way top file, or same way the file routes resolution goes. So every file client request that comes in, it's going to look in the first GitFS remote first, then the second. So you're compounding the problem when you have it's basically not what it was designed to do. And there's ways that I've had in mind that can fix that. It's basically caching with using the Salt's caching existing caching subsystems. So if you request a file from given environment, and you know it'll go through that sort of search path to find the first match, and then save it in memory so that subsequent file client requests don't on that same worker thread don't repeat that work. And I think that'll help. But yeah, I just don't think it. I think that the way that people have evolved to use GitFS doesn't match the way it was designed in the first place.
Sure, and my concern is not using those. I don't know that that's at least the way they're written now is a good workable solution. What I'm interested in is like I said, with the PS team saying roll your own. Well, we're attempting to roll our own, but then the question is, are we going to get inconsistent state runs because files are changing? We could have a dependency problem, right? Where a minion grabs one file and then the next thing it goes and grabs is from a different version of our repo, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I have done, and this is where I want some direction. I've written a state that makes sure that on disk, so we're just using, as far as the master is concerned, we're just using file routes on disk, and then I'm doing all the Git operations to get it down to the master file system, right? In that state, I'm making sure that those changes are atomic. In other words, I'm pulling down the whole thing and I'm doing a symlink move so that as far as the Linux file system, it's atomic. My question is the Salt master process going to be happy with seeing that change like that? Will that be okay with it? Or does it also need some sort of locking or cache purge or something?
for file roots, the available files are just just like with GitFS, like the list of files that's requested frequently and things like file that recurs, etc. That's cached for like, I think like default 20 seconds. So that like making the change, unless you clear that cache, you'll have a small period of time in which you're not going to have the file server will report a path not being present that maybe is, right?
Okay. Should I attack that onto the end of my state run when I know it made that atomic change and let the master know, hey, go update the cache so that you see?
That's a master signed action. So there's a runner for it.
Okay.
The clear file server list cache or something like that, or
Right.
or it's somewhere. It's in the file server runner module. It's like clear file list cache or whatever it is.
Okay. I'll look for that.
We add that to orchestration in order to so basically what we do on our CDN is we deploy state, we deploy all of our salt formulas into individual directories. They're all versioned via Git tags, right? And then the CI pipelines for those will push those out to a directory, and then we have orchestration that will build all of our environments as directories, and then symlink to all the formula directories, right? So that we could assign different versions of different formulas to different paths. So we don't do any Git checkout. We're deploying, like we're deploying things based on the given Git tag, but we're just deploying the files over using like rsync via a CI pipeline. And that allows us to not have to worry about managing Git clones.
Yeah, I mean that's not a problem, right? I'm just using the Git module, the state module,
Mhm.
and that's fine. It works for us. If it was some other method for transferring files, that seems like a moot point to me. It's once it's there, I want to make sure that things function as expected once it's on the file system. So
yeah, whatever you're doing has to have some. You need to either wait 20 seconds or whatever, or you need to have it be part of some orchestration that will intentionally clear that file list cache
and by
before
wait 20
you
seconds,
try to run the
like,
state.
I should inhibit state runs during that 20 seconds.
Well, I mean, if you're doing it as part of orchestration, you just make so you do whatever would potentially update the files.
Yep.
After that orchestration stage, you do a runner action to clear the list cache, file list cache.
Yep.
And then, and only then, after those two complete, will you run your actual states that you want to run.
Okay, because just to give you more context, the reason that's a concern is we have the scheduled high states on the minions. So the minions themselves have that schedule, and it just happens. So that's
okay. So they're being generated by on the minion side by the scheduler.
Yes.
Okay.
And if that's not a good pattern, I could change that to handle this situation. That may be where I need to update things.
Yeah, I mean, your changes are still you're still going to have some potential for there being some sort of race condition where you've copied files but you haven't yet reached the runner action.
Okay.
But yeah, those will happen. Like if you're trying to access a new file, right? Or the reverse could happen if if you're doing like a file.recurse and it's accessing a file or it's trying to manage a file that, because recurse is just a sort of like a loop of file.managed. And so if it gets the file list, and it wants to manage, one path, and then between that and, and when you do between that, when you change your files, like you could have a race condition where that file, after the list cache has been retrieved and before it gets to that its iteration of many different, file.manage runs, that file could suddenly be removed by you updating your files, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's the problem you run into with not using orchestration.
And that's okay. We're in a small environment. We could change that. And even if we didn't want all the minions doing a high state at once, we could batch it. So that's not a problem. I can change that pattern. I'm curious, for the greater good of the community, if because the GitFS and the external Git pillar are so brittle, I know everybody's use cases and environments are going to be different, so it's not like there's one good way to prescribe this, but at least it might be nice to have a docs page that say, if you want to roll your own Git or file routes, or, like you guys have, right, a CI pipeline that delivers that, here's the gotchas, here's the things to watch out for that you have to account for. And maybe just a simple method, right? Would be really nice to have that documented.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of related to that, Pygit 2 with SSH on ARM64 doesn't seem to pass on our test suite. That's another gotcha there.
But either way, thanks for all the input, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I heard, Cody, that you just volunteered to write some docs.
That is not what you heard, Daniel.
But one other thing just to mention in terms of the Git related memory leaks is that if the repository in question has a lot of churn, if it's updating a lot, you'll see that memory leak spike way faster than if it's pretty static. If your Git repository isn't changing that much, you might not even notice the memory leak, or might not even be affected. But if you are making changes, especially like multiple changes or dozens of changes a day, yeah, you'll see it the memory usage just skyrockets.
That's interesting. Then maybe that problem is exacerbated in the latest release, because we as an organization, we're only merging to master where that was our GitFS was plugged into, maybe once, maybe twice a day. So we were seeing a lot of memory consumption.
I don't think it's just merging into master. I think it's because if I recall correctly, the cause of the memory leak has to do with the way that the underlying Git libraries,
so it's the entire repo itself, not just
yeah, because they're iterating over all of the changes that they can find, and those changes just get stored in memory.
Well,
and then every time they find a new change, they iterate over all the changes again and store those changes.
That still holds true, because in our org we only have 3 individuals contributing to that repo, and we're talking about, I don't know, a dozen commits a day. A dozen commits a day is not a lot.
No, so right, yes,
and maybe half of that in branches. So that's a pretty significant memory leak for dozens.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the nature of this particular memory leak is what would normally be like, oh yeah, that's not a heavy workload. For this particular leak, just the way things are implemented, things that shouldn't be a heavy workload end up being just like ridiculous. So yeah.
And another thing is there could be other leaks that aren't related to the Git stuff that we're not aware of, or we are aware of. I just pasted a ticket into the chat, an open issue that we haven't been able to reproduce yet, but it leads me to believe that there are other potential leaks, not just the Git stuff. So if we could narrow down,
I'll keep an eye out for any of that. The only other things we're using, I am running the Open API, and we're doing job returns to the Postgres, using the Postgres returner to a database that is not on the same.
Hey, Cody, are you using Salt API by the CherryPy interface or no?
Yes, sir, I am.
Then, so one of the things that we noticed at Scale is that if you use just the local client, so that like waits for response, right? What that does is it sets up a bunch of like file descriptors and does like CherryPy just internally just sets up a bunch of stuff to pull for the response, and we found that those leaked file descriptors. So we would, if we did not actually to set up a beacon, a custom beacon to track that, because after a few weeks or so, we would exhaust all the available file descriptors on the box, and then bad things would happen, like when you can't get a file descriptor. So you can't open files, you can't do anything. So I would, what we did to solve that is we started running everything with local async, and then we pull for the results on a schedule, right? And so that I would recommend doing that if you're doing if you're noticing, well, especially if you're running Salt API stuff at scale.
Okay. Is there any open issues for dealing with that with the Salt API?
Well, they all seem, when I try to track this down, it all seemed to be within CherryPy. So, like, and I don't have the chops or the know-how of how all that works internally to have dug any further. But simply doing it asynchronously and checking for the results of the job, immediately got rid of the leaking resources on Salt API for us.
Okay. The main way we're using that Salt API at the moment, and it will expand, is I've got Alkali plugged into it, for those of you who are familiar with that.
Yeah, I also think that speaking of Salt API, I remember Randy previously was talking about how he's been working on re-implementing Salt API using Fast API. I don't know what his progress is on that at the moment, but it'll be interesting to see what the future of that looks like. Yeah,
that would be amazing. I would be willing to help out where my knowledge is deep enough on that. I do have a pretty good knowledge of Fast API, but I don't know if I've got the depth of knowledge to help on the Salt side, but I would be willing to contribute to move that along.
I'll say one more thing on the memory leak stuff. 3003 should be the least leaky version of Salt. At least I believe that's the case. Particularly just because of the loader changes that we made.
All right, not to beat it to death, but thanks for the input, guys.
Actually, just one more point on that. Does it make sense that to add a third method besides PyGet2 and was it GitPython that just shells out to like a Git client so that we don't have everyone having to roll their own? Is that, I'm not sure if that's even possible if you have enough hooks into the CLI client to do it, but that might just be a method that solves the problem for everyone.
I'm not sure that solves it for the simple reason that GitPython itself is shelling out to do its stuff. So GitPython cannot be used without Git CLI installed.
Yeah, I think there's basically two paths forward. One is to go in and actually fix the memory leaks in the libraries that we're using. I don't have a good sense of how much work it would be to do that. I know I've looked at it in the past, and I just started finding all kinds of stuff that was like, oh, this is clearly a problem. The other one, and I forget the name of it right now, but there's the pure Python implementation of Git. But I think, Eric, and you can speak to this, I think we actually had an implementation using that, and there were reasons why we chose not to.
Like you mean that other the Dulwich bindings for Python?
Yep.
The reason that we couldn't use that was because it didn't have all of the things that we needed to support all of the various features. Like we were unable to do certain things with references that we need to do, and also nobody used it. So
yeah.
So yeah, we weren't able to maintain feature parity.
Sure. So it sounds like the best thing is to choose one of the two that we support now, and try to figure out what's going to be the least amount of work.
I think that at least some of the performance issues would be solved by caching which remote and which which remote has a match for a given file path. It's just and we have to figure out how to how that cache gets invalidated. If it's I would say until updates, like until it pulls new updates, like it should be considered valid, I think. But that's a big thing, because let's say you have like a dozen formulas. It's like we didn't have formulas when GitFS started. That's the thing, right? And people are like, oh, hey, I have these formulas. I can just make them all GitFS remotes. Well, like, what that means is that let's say you want to reference like one of your formulas, and it's like the 20th one on the list. It's still going to check the other 19 first every single time for every file client request, right? And so I think a lot of that churn a lot of that churn is going to be ameliorated by caching which one matched, right? So.
Yep. But I will say, like right now, that's not no one on the core team is focused on Git FS at this point. So I don't know when that would happen, but we can try. We can try to put it into the pipeline and have someone work on it eventually.
I have an unrelated question came up in the chat. Just regards to the module.run state.
Yeah, we're not deprecating module.run.
No, well, it wasn't it, but it was mainly to do with the old versus the new syntax.
Yeah.
And the config item. What I was thinking, and maybe you're already anticipating this, but I was thinking that there should be no reason that the state can't figure out which format is used and support either one.
Yeah. That's actually not something I had thought about. Basically, we need to decide what we're going to do there, and we haven't decided yet. We either need to deprecate one of them or support both of them indefinitely.
Yeah.
And if we're going to support both of them indefinitely, then I agree. We don't want to have a config option anymore.
Well, the newer format. Well, I think that's superior just because you don't have all the weird shadowing of option names, and maybe there's a better way of doing it, but I'm hesitant to try to introduce a third format. So I think, for whatever flaws it may have, my vote would be for the new format.
Me too.
But like, it's a very frequent topic of discussion why module.run doesn't work, you know, and the implementation with having to use a minion config item is just it doesn't have any other comparison anywhere else in Salt, and it's
My preference would be to support one and for it to be the new one. Tom's preference was it for it to be the old one because he's like, why are we breaking people's stuff? The problem is at this point we're gonna break somebody's stuff, regardless of which one we deprecate.
Yeah. Well, we do have some precedent for multiple formats, and that's with the reactor, right? The reactor configs had similar shadowing issues, and both the old and new formats are supported. The reactor just, you know, knows by the data structure it's getting, right?
Sure.
Whether it's a sort of list of one item dictionaries similar to states, or if it's, you know, or if it's in a different format, like it can figure it out and then follow the right code path to support that, you know, interpreting it, you know, using the old input schema as opposed to the new one, right? And then you know, whatever it parses down, it still ends up it's you know, it's a final result is still the same. Like it's just you know, it's just choosing which code path to do automatically rather than forcing people to tell it which one to use via a minion config item.
Yep.
So I do think there's room to do both.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody, I haven't looked into it deeply, but my understanding is that the syntax for both approaches is unambiguous. So whether you do one way or the other, the syntax will either, you know, you'll be doing one of them correctly, and you can't just like mix and match with something that looks reasonable. So we should be able to just identify which one people want and then use that without actually having to resort to a config flag.
Yeah, my only concern about supporting both is just maintaining two, the same thing.
Yeah, right.
There's a bug in one.
Which we've been doing for years already. So I mean,
in a different place in the code base.
So the last time we discussed it internally, the core team, we decided that the path that we were going to go was to deprecate the old and then in favor of the new, not support multiple versions just because of the confusion and the ambiguity of having two different ways of doing something, two very different ways of doing something. And as like D Wells's point, like we would end up supporting multiple ways of doing things and just the issues. I mean, the fact that we're talking about it now means that there are issues with people trying to use it. So to me, like, I mean, I was in favor of getting rid of the new version and just bringing back the old version. But after the internal discussion, I became convinced that we should just move forward in favor of the new and deprecate the old. It has its merits and its benefits.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we'll discuss it some more. We'll look at the potential for just trying to support both, or maybe trying to support both for a while. But we have to look at it some more. But we definitely do need to make a decision on that, like in a reasonable time frame, like the next few months.
Yeah, and there's ways to like work around it with, you know, there's ugly ginger ways of working around it by looking at the ops and seeing like, oh, does my minion have this? And like there's ways of doing it, but they suck. Like having because we've had to resort to based on whatever point in the config life cycle a machine may be in, it may or may not have config option set, so we have to have, in the very few places where we do have module.run used, we have to actually use both formats already now,
Yeah.
and which,
Go ahead, Eric, sorry.
I was saying, and whichever one we end up using is determined by whether that option is set in the ops dictionary, so.
Sure. So
And
based
I was
on,
just gonna add that
Oh,
Mark
sorry.
Smith shared in the chat. Mark Smith shared in the chat that discussion in IRC in the past has suggested that full should be possible without breaking anyone. So just wanted to add his voice to that.
yeah, so based on this discussion, what I'm thinking is a good path forward would be to support both for a while, detect if someone's using the old one and give them a good warning that there would be a deprecation at some point in the future, so that we don't indefinitely support both.
Mhm.
Mark Smith said, why not? With a smiley face, I'll add.
Why not indefinitely support both? Because maintaining salt is already a huge chore. And more stuff to maintain is not ideal.
One other point of note is I believe salt dash lint also warns on using the old syntax as well. I could be mistaken, but that's maybe at least another. If it's not in salt lint, that may be a good way to get people moved over to the new syntax as well.
Okay, everyone, great discussion. And I hate to cut it off, but it sounds like Diwa said, it's just a discussion that needs to be continued. But glad we could talk about it here. As we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone to participate in working group, to reach out to me or to Sage if you are interested in being a captain of a working group or just have questions about getting involved. We'd love to connect you to that. Again, thank you guys so much for the awesome discussion today in Open Hour. And be sure to go to saltproject.io if you need anything Salt Project related. And we'll see you on Slack and everywhere else. So thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your Thursday.